The more I was losing sight, the more I could see clearly because my city was changing for me. Hi everyone, I'm Nidhi Goyal. I am a disabled feminist. I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, a non-profit that works on rights of people with disabilities with a focus on women and youth with disabilities. When I acquired a disability at 15 and I started losing sight, and then I eventually became blind, and after that I became an activist. My city was changing from a space that was fine, I could go anywhere, do anything, to hey, would this be accessible? Hey, why don't we have a clear contrast zebra crossing mark? To then slowly, hey, I wish this signal had either the braille markings or the vibration outputs that many of the red lights or signals in Europe or other UK or any other countries had. So it's very interesting how the city shifted, not just for me, but for my sibling, who's also a woman, right? She's a non-disabled woman. And I remember she laughs about it, but she always says, saying, oh my God, walking with you is so difficult. Not because I have a problem assisting you, not because I don't enjoy walking with you. All of that is great. But when we both walk together, people look at me and they stare at me. And then they stare at you and you can't see, so you don't respond. And then they stare at me again. With all of those questions of who is she? Like, what's this kind of person? Why are they carrying this stick? What has happened to them? What are you doing? With some level of pity, with lots of curiosity, with a lot of judgment, and with many preconceived notions, and in many cases, confusion. For disabled women, safety includes accessibility. We were mapping with disabled and non-disabled women together, and non-disabled women very often said, if it's night, if the street is not lit, if we don't have our cell phones, and so on and so forth, right? Many, many common responses. Disabled women said, if it's inaccessible, if it's broad daylight also, I have my cell phone also, there is, enough of people around also, if it's not accessible, it's not safe. And it's not because I feel like, oh my God, I'll walk into traffic and I'll die. That's not what safety means, right? It means that because we don't have those ways or accessibility features or infrastructural accessibility, that I can cross the street independently. So what do? I call out to someone. What do I do to just access that city space is to invite someone in my physical space, in my intimate space, and allow them to touch me. As a woman, many a times people say, hello, what does touch mean to you? I'm like, many a times I disconnect my arms from my body. Like I disconnect saying arms are my intimate space at all, because I have to offer my arm to every stranger who I meet, or my hand to every stranger's elbow that I meet. For me, gender and violence have always been linked and has been a natural part when they intersect with disability. But what I realized as an activist, not as a disabled woman, but as an activist, is that a lot of other women with disabilities associate this gender and violence, or violence because of gender, with as a disability experience. Because they're constantly told it's okay. If you're disabled, you will face this. So if you need assistance, somebody harasses you, it's okay. That's because you're disabled. That's not because you're a woman, right? So somewhere ungendering of the violence experience happens with women with disabilities. It's perhaps because women with disabilities themselves are ungendered. You're treated as someone who's not a woman enough, who sort of does not have a gendered experience in life. You're just reduced to your disability. In 1990s, right, I think 94 to be precise, the violence went to such a level where finally it became visible. Through the efforts of women with disability activists, then the feminist movement took stock and said, listen, wait, this is not okay. The whole idea was that state was saying that in state-run quote-unquote mental hospitals, you could perform hysterectomy on the girls, women living there, saying that it's easier to manage menstruation. A surgical process without consent for a woman above 18 which has an impact on her reproductive health and rights, was said to be okay by the state. And so there was an uproar. And that's where the whole recognition, or a very strong recognition, of gender-based violence and disability as a movement, at least collaboratively between the disability rights and feminist movement, began. So when we talk about sexuality and violence or identity and violence, a very important thing is how much of access do disabled people have to concepts like these. To give you a simple example, the sign language, we always struggle to do trainings with deaf participants because sign language vocabulary did not exist, let me put it that way, right? The sign for violence in Indian Sign Language was just one for any form of violence. And the sign, at least as a person, what I felt, or the feeling that it would give me, is physical violence. And so explaining concepts, making them accessible to understand, internalize, reflect and unpack, these are very, very big English words. When we talk about gender-based violence, we look at spaces, right? And home is an equally important space. When I said cities are made up of people, but those people make up homes. They make up your relationships. They make up your your neighborhood. They are the people who work with you. So within what happens within buildings, within families, within neighborhoods is extremely important when we're talking about cities, right? And this is the kind of violence which, for many, many, many people, home is considered a safe space. And so the violence that goes on at home is either not recognized or unwilling to be reported, or there is no possibility of an exit. When you're a disabled woman, how would you report if your caregiver, primary caregiver, is violating you? What would you tell them? That you're harassing me, please connect me to the phone line and I'll talk to them. What will you tell them? How will you tell them that because you have not given me a separate phone, give me your phone so that I can call a police helpline, right? What are you going to tell them saying, I'll leave the house and go where? To shelter homes that don't want to accept women with disabilities? I mentioned a few forms of violence that happen at home and in families. Isolation, neglect, denial of existence. If you look at the Neglected and Forgotten report that Rising Flame published recently about the impact of COVID on women with disabilities, they're really subtle forms of violence, which you may not think is violence, right? One of the signers, a deaf woman who signs, says they don't sign enough. When the family knows sign language and tells me only basic things, I feel really, really isolated. I feel unwanted. But isn't this the same as your family talking amongst themselves and not talking to you constantly? We need to think about it. Even today, when we talk about domestic violence, does it strike anyone immediately that for a disabled woman, domestic violence is simply not giving her medications on time, simply putting away her assistive device in a space where she cannot reach by herself without asking her? That's not considered violence in any space, right? That's not considered to be violating her right, because we don't consider that seeking consent from a disabled woman is required at all. When caregivers do not ask them before undressing them, because it's a routine part. When they are told what to wear and what not to wear. When their desires or wishes are actively stopped. When they're isolated. If there are guests at home, many families don't invite their disabled daughters to join the celebrations because they'll be like, she'll be in the room. They're considered inauspicious, not good, as a shame, embarrassment. We don't consider it to be violence when we're talking about women with disabilities not being counted in the census. Why do you think we are undercounted in the census? It's because there is this shame that I'd rather not say I have a disabled daughter. Maybe I'll not even count her in the census. I'd rather not report her disability at all. So many, many forms of violence are not reported. Many forms of violence are not considered as violence. Like even in the law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, you'll see today. And this is not something you'll see for any other woman, right? Termination of pregnancy cannot happen except in cases of severe disability. Cannot happen without the consent of the disabled woman. And the act or the law does not define severe disabilities anyway. This is such a glaring sort of legal violation of rights of women with disabilities, right? We don't know about it. We don't care about it. There are stories where, because the daughter was disabled, the family members have given them contraceptive pills on their wedding and said that these are strengthening pills. These are vitamin sort of strengthening pills. Please have it every day. And after a year, the women have discovered that when they were trying to conceive, that they have actually been eating contraceptive pills because somebody else saw it and told her that this is contraceptive pills. It's not a pill for strengthening. So where, in the history, it is, you may see, okay, domestic violence, yes, rape laws, there's been progress. If you see the rape laws, it includes the needs, or at least talks about the needs of women with disabilities. You'll see POCSO talks about children with disabilities, but there is so many forms of violence. And I'm not even talking about everyday discrimination and violations. There are just so many forms of violence that we're not speaking about that need that space. And the excuses are running out. Forced hysterectomy because there's better menstrual management still continues. Forced hysterectomy because parents feel that she lives with an intellectual disability and it's better that she doesn't have a uterus, because if she's raped, at least she won't have a child. It's really, really difficult.